Right, very warm welcome to Food and Fibre Plus workshop series where we are defining and getting the specifics right. And this session is all about sustainable land management and water security. So as per the other workshops that we have done so far this morning, how we sort of do this flow is that the first part I will share with you some of the information that we have already gleaned from stakeholder interviews and also the kickoff workshop, which was held on the 6th of October. And in addition to that, many of the literature reports and reviews that have been done as well. So I will be just grounding us on what some of the pain points and key challenges are, and also what some of the stakeholders have as ideas for collaborating across Central Queensland when we're thinking about sustainable land management and water security for the future. So the purpose of this is to ground you, to remind us all of some of the work that has been already done. And it also is to serve as a springboard for ideas so that each of us can be building upon those as we go into the workshop itself. The workshop itself will be very interactive. We will be using a number of collaboration tools. So we will be sharing a whiteboard. So we will be typing up and sharing our thoughts in a written format. We'll also be using the chat. And we have a poll as well so that you can sort of be expressing your opinion in that way. Of course, you can always be using the emojis and the Zoom tools as well to be sharing how you're feeling about things. And at any point, use the chat to capture reflections, ideas, any comments or any questions as well. Please use the chat. So that covers our ways of working. So let's kick off with me sharing effectively what are some of the pain points, some of the key challenges, and some of the key opportunities for collaborating on this very important theme that have been already shared before. So for many of you, you would have seen this chart on the 6th of October, and I'm just doing it to sort of ground ourselves. And there's a few extra things here too. So what are some of the pain points that I've been hearing and the project management team have been hearing when it comes to sustainable land management and water security across our greater regions, everywhere from the Whitsundays right through to Fitzroy areas, right out to Longreach and beyond? So one of the themes that I've heard coming through quite regularly is weeds and how to protect our native species and the economic as well as the environmental impact that weeds are having. And in particular, I've heard a lot about the prickly acacia as one of the examples. Also hearing about macropods and some of the challenges that we have there with land management. We've been hearing a lot about the incentives, or perhaps the lack of incentives, to invest in our natural capital. And so natural capital meaning, everything from the soil, the quality of the land, and the air, and all the natural assets that we have. And how do we invest in that and know that we're going to get the return? So there is some fear of making those changes, and if you do spend the time and the money and in education, what are the outcomes going to be? So there's some fear about the risks that need to be taken. Specifically about water, this is really just touching on it. There's so much more to this, but just as a comment, that the water is just sort of runs off everywhere. So there were the examples that we are as a pain point. We are losing the ability in our ancient soils to be capturing the water and driving that back down into the water tables. And do we know enough about our specific, unique, ancient soils? And do we have enough science behind this as well? And are the situations of where we all live, is this unique to anywhere else in the world? And do we actually know enough about the specific management of water and the land in the places where we live? So and this is just some of the pain points. So I really stress that, so that this is an opportunity for you to be building upon these, and these are just to get you sort of thinking about what they could be. So I'm absolutely positive you'll be coming up with many, many more. This is just a few to get us started. So if we think about what are the collaboration opportunities across Central Queensland when it comes to sustainable land management and also securing our water supplies into the future. Again, here are just some of the ideas that we've heard, and there's many, many more. Collaborative weed management and integrated programs around this using tech or governance, containment programs. More strategic cluster fencing programs. There's been some success there from some of the stakeholders have shared that, and other opportunities to expand those sorts of collaborative programs. Enhancing our natural capital and providing the incentives to be investing in our natural capital, and some specific examples here being, carbon farming in dryland areas. Also, more evidence of sustainable land management practices. So if you look at the flip side, if there's fear and not knowing what the returns of investment are going to be, will there be more support and science-based evidence to provide that help in making those transitions to more sustainable land management practices? And finding role models who can share, what is working and what are these having more incentives around sediment control to avoid, sediments working into our waterways and out to the reef. IP opportunities for Indigenous native bush foods and medicine, and what are the protocols that are in place so that the beneficiaries of that are respected for generations to come. And ideas around pilots of integrated water management programs where the landowners take on increased knowledge and responsibility of understanding how to manage their land and how to, importantly, manage the water, and that sense of responsibility of that it is a system and a system of a regenerative system. And there were specific examples within that. So, adopting those land management principles, and specifically we had some examples of quite granular, getting into the example of perhaps a leaky weirs, leaky dams. So these are just some of the ideas, and there will be many more. So I really would love everybody to start thinking about how to build. And also, if you think some of these are ideas that, I'm not so sure about, this is an opportunity to be constructive, and all, diversity of ideas is absolutely welcomed. And the only caveat is that we do that in respectful and honest ways with each other, so that we're hearing everybody's different points of view. So on that point, I'm just going to pause to see at this point, have we got, and I'm just looking at the videos of you all. If you have got video and you're comfortable, it'd be great if you could switch your video on so we can see if we've got any questions so far before we head into getting into the actual workshop itself. So any questions from the floor so far? We may have some people who have joined us for this workshop for the first time and haven't been involved in the previous one. So if so, no problem at all if you'd like to ask some questions. Looks like we are all good. If you do have questions, the best way to do it is to just raise either your physical hand with your video on, or to raise your virtual hand, and I can see that on the participants list. Great. Okay, well, let's move on forward then. So next I would like to share with you, when we had gathered on the 6th of October for our kickoff workshop, one of the questions that we'd asked for each of the 4 themes, of which sustainable land management and water security was one of them, how significant is this theme and how important is it? If you were to give it a score out of 10, where does it sort of lie? this polling chart really demonstrates that this theme had tremendous amount of energy as a real priority for across Central Queensland to be focusing on. So as you can see, the mode was, I think it was 9.5. Right in the middle there, and the mean was 8.21. So we've got, yeah, so both 9 and 10 were the most voted, and then but on average, so it was obviously some polarization there because the average has been dropped down a little bit more. So, but overarching, this was a really compelling and important theme from all of the people who were participants at the kickoff workshop. So then this leads us to the last part where I'm sharing, and this is still getting and sparking some ideas in you all, is a proposed problem statement. So it's not the final, it's just a draft to get us thinking about when the project management team and myself work together on, well, how can we distill this? What are the bigger problems that, you know, we would just to sort of wrap it up in a smaller way? We just came up with quite a few things, like just sort of that, are we embedded in traditional practices, you know, with good reason, you know, been doing these, our land management in our traditional ways for a really long time, and what are the pros and cons? And if we are to change, what are the risks? And what are the costs, and are they unknown? And, you know, particularly this concern around yields is something that I've been hearing in the stakeholder interviews, that if you are making changes in the practices, and in particular, I'm talking about farming practices, whoops, just go back, then, you know, how is that going to compete with my short-term priorities? So if there are, you know, yield targets that need to be made in the next year, or, you know, 3 to 5 years, what, you know, this could be unknown, and that comes with a lot of fear and skepticism associated with that too. And water security would be a part of this as well. So that brings us to the point where I stopped doing the talking, and it goes back to the group, and we are going to use the annotation on the whiteboard. So I know most of you have seen this already, but for those of you who have just joined us for this workshop, the annotation button is this little thing that looks like a pen just there, and you should have that on your Zoom thing. So when I go to the next slide, which is going to be a whiteboard around the challenges, please just click on the annotate button, and then when you do that, let's move straight to the next board. And when you do that, you will be given an option, a little drop-down box comes out, and in there is text. It'll have mouse select text. So click on text, and then also pick a color, which is under format. So I've, you know, so once you do that, so what I would like for everybody to do here at this point is to share with us on this whiteboard, our virtual whiteboard, what you see as the key challenges, those key pain points when it comes to sustainable land management and water security across Central Queensland. So this is our first sort of reflective task to build upon some of the ideas that I've already shared, or to validate those, and so just start typing those in onto the key challenges here. We've got a couple coming through. Fantastic. Poor government rollout of carbon initiatives. Absolutely. I've heard that. I've heard that talked about a few times from stakeholders. So thank you for sharing that. How to manage and overcome natural disasters. Absolutely. Those shocks that can come and sometimes unplanned is also has been talked about a lot. So thank you for bringing that up. Not enough support from agencies around farm systems, and lack of knowledge of the greater system. Absolutely. So we've got a few more coming through, I can see. Short-term incentives outweigh the long-term incentives for sustainable management. An understanding of the traditional ecological knowledge. Yeah, I think this is really interesting. It has been talked about too, you know, that the fact that our land is different from other parts of the world as well. And how can we gain a better understanding of that, and what may work in different parts of the world may not work in our part of the world. And the lack of respect for Indigenous knowledge when it comes to land management and caring for country. Excellent. And how to use technology to assist in the water security and land management. And the economic benefits of sustainable land management and increasing our biodiversity, ecosystem services. Excellent. Excellent. Well, we'll just have another 30 seconds and then I will save this whiteboard. And I love it that we've got people starting to use some of the other tools here too. There's stamps. I can see someone's got the stamps happening on your annotation bar where you can put a tick or a star or an arrow or a question or a cross or a love heart. So keep those happening. So 5 more seconds. So if you've got some thoughts, quickly pop them down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Great. I'm just going to save that as a PDF for us later, and I'm going to clear everything on this for now. We'll go to the next part. Great. So the next part after key challenges is just like last time we looked at then, well, what's causing this? What are the root causes? What are the positives and the negatives, the driving forces behind it? It's always that harder piece where we start thinking, okay, well, we can say what the problems are, but what's actually caused it in the first place? It's that peeling back the onion. What's at the heart of it that we really do need to address or understand, you know, what's driving it. And sometimes it can be a positive force as well as a negative force. You know, sometimes it can be that, you know, there are positives that are coming about because of COVID. You know, people are reflecting a lot more on sustainability. They're thinking about self-sufficiency. There's an increased awareness that wasn't there before. So that's an example of a positive. And someone has just shared the changing societal expectations, and that is a trend, and it really is it is a force. So perhaps we could hear a little bit more about how are those societal expectations changing. And then we've got the reef regulations as well, and the impacts that that's having, you know, by having that governance and the regulations, and also, you know, the rest of the world looking at how we're managing our reef is increasing too. Global disasters, the risk and the climate variation drivers. So as you write these things down, it's great too to give some tangible examples to bring these to life just that little bit more, so that we can see as an example, you know, what's the granular. They sort of layer it even deeper. Excellent. We're seeing some really more granular examples here. Like there was the example of hemp. Ongoing expectations for cheap food and the lack of willingness to pay the real cost of production and value. So that's sort of, it's consumer trend, but it's also the impacts of the world of just, you know, needing to feed people across the world is driving that cheap food still. The drying out of our landscape. Excellent. Well, just another 10 seconds on this one. before I take a screenshot, and we'll move to the next. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Great, let's take a screenshot of that. And I will clear all. Thank you so much for fantastic contributions. And our final whiteboard is the exciting part, which is the collaborative opportunities that we are worth exploring. So when we're thinking about collaborating, we're thinking about it across the whole of Central Queensland. How can we work better together on sustainable land management opportunities and water security? Think about what are the opportunities that we can do if we do work together so much better. You know, that if we're just working on our own, they can have an impact, but it's not the same as if we actually really worked as a greater region. What would really benefit from that collaboration, stretching across those regions and leaning on each other more so that we can have more shared value. The merging, I think, that traditional knowledges with Western science, beautiful. Knowledge building and capacity building on cost-effective carbon assessments, helping people overcome that fear, that's fantastic. The whole of region catchment collaboration and incentives for this type of planning, excellent. Virtual low-cost carbon stock takes. Kangaroo meat processing linked with coastal manufacturers and markets. Excellent. I love it how we're starting to get some really granular examples as well. So I know this will just be one thing, but it actually just brings concepts to life when we can get, you know, really specific. Getting dryland farmers involved in land rehabilitation. So for every point that you've done, just think about it even one step further. So how would you do that? You know, how would we collaborate? And jot those thoughts down. So we've got here linking large industries to land and water sustainability. Example, mining and linking that to agriculture. Excellent. So keep jotting these ideas down and look at what other people have written. And there's an opportunity too to use your annotation, either ticks or the loves or the likes or the crosses, or you can build upon people's ideas as well. So, you know, underneath where they've written something, maybe if you've got an example, build upon that. Great to see the stamps being used, some ticks and taking on board what other people have said or written. And one of the reasons why we're doing this today too, everyone, is that we're using different ways of collaborating virtually. And so we're purposely doing some parts where we're being reflective and thinking and reading. And encouraging each other with the stamps. So just take a moment to absorb what other people have written, and it would be great if you could get your stamp button and just make a tick on at least one other idea that somebody else has placed that you think, I've got, you know, I could build upon that, or I really agree. We need a bigger whiteboard. Okay, so just 5 more seconds and I'm going to take a screenshot and then clear this, and we're going to get ready for our breakout rooms. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Right, let's save that. And I'm going to clear all the drawings. Close the annotation. And right, we're going to be ready now for our breakout session. So in this breakout session, just like the last one, the first task that each of you will have as we break out into these groups, and I'm going to do 4 groups, is that the first thing you need to do is appoint a spokesperson for your group. So either self-nominate if you're comfortable for doing this, or tap someone on the shoulder if you think they'd be good at it, and that person will have the role of facilitating your little group to making sure that everyone is on task and going through these 3 things. So discussing what are those key challenges and the driving force behind that, and then really importantly, build upon those collaborative opportunities that are going to be worth exploring when it comes to sustainable land management and water security. So before we break out too, please put your videos on if you're comfortable with that. It does make it much more engaging for people to be able to see your faces. And you don't really have to do anything. I'll just automatically put you into a room and discuss those 3 things. And then when we come back, the spokesperson will be sharing back on everybody's behalf. When you're in the breakout room, it will not be recorded. We're only recording in this session out in the open forum, just so that everybody knows too. So feel really comfortable to, have a great discussion. And absolutely welcome diversity of ideas, and be intrigued and interested, particularly if somebody has a different idea from you. That's a great opportunity to find out why and learn a bit more about each other as we do that. So I'm just going to check in with you all. I'm looking at the participants. Does anybody have any concerns or questions before we go into the breakout room? Got a thumbs up from everybody? Great. Okay then. Right, breakout rooms, here we come. If you can still keep on your videos, that would be great. Hi. Welcome back, everybody. And how did that session go? So maybe give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Good session. Brilliant. Okay, well, as per usual, the phase that we're at now is that I'm going to ask for those of you who were the spokespeople for your group, if you could please let yourself be known. You can either raise your physical hand and wave. So we've got Tonya is one person. Fantastic. And who else have we got? Kimberly. Thanks, Kimberly. There should be 2 more. And we had David. Excellent. And we had Matt. Haha. Good to hear that. Excellent. Okay. Well, the process here, I'll just share my screen so we can remind ourselves of it. So what we're going to do is each of you, so starting with Tonya, we're going to share back. So thinking about sustainable land management and water security, share back what your group saw as the key challenges and the driving forces behind that. So I put some things in the chat about what are the positives as well as the negative forces that are driving our changes towards sustainable land management and water security into the future. And then the exciting part, which is where are the collaborative opportunities worth exploring for across Central Queensland. So I'll stop sharing and go back so we can see everyone's face, and we'll start with Tonya. Over to you, Tonya.
I was in a group with Alicia and Suzanne. I think Suzanne would be a much better presenter, but she passed. So I think for us, the key challenge that we discussed, I don't think we stuck exactly to the format. It was more of a discussion, but it was really quite interesting and insightful. I think Suzanne highlighted that partnerships with Indigenous communities as we develop solutions is absolutely imperative. But we discussed how potentially challenging that is, and it's probably a mix of lack of engagement from both sides. And we spoke about how ways we could potentially bring people together on a journey, and also succession planning within the Indigenous communities but also within farmers. I think Suzanne, you mentioned that as well. So there's almost lack of succession planning across for all land owners and users, which is a concern, and spoke about ways we can potentially engage the youth and bring them into the farming community, as well as the land management that Suzanne's doing. She's an Indigenous landowner with over 22,000 acres. So that's pretty substantial. And they do a lot of land restoration. They're part of Greening Australia. They're doing native foods and a lot of ecological projects. Suzanne, I don't know, you're welcome to add to in the chat all the different things you're doing, because you're clearly a very busy woman. We spoke about how water security and the use of water by certain councils and is probably sometimes doesn't seem very practical or appropriate. We spoke about a ski park that was being developed close in the council where Suzanne is located, where water is scarce and should be used potentially more for irrigation and land restoration, as opposed to a bit more of a wasteful kind of use. But you know, I mean, the reasons behind that, there might have been good reasons, but they just weren't transparent, and people don't understand very well how those decisions were made. So we spoke about how transparency should be improved in terms of water use when there's a lot of diversity and competing needs for water. So when those decisions are made. I think when we spoke about collaboration, Suzanne shared a wonderful idea about trying to fix that key challenge of partnering with Indigenous communities and engaging them in discussions with regard to land management and water security. And Suzanne suggested a Caring for Country festival to bring everybody together as a way of both attracting youth, but also facilitating the relationship building and the engagement with those Indigenous communities. Suzanne, I probably have been paraphrasing you most of the way. So
you probably have. Yeah, look, I think, yeah, absolutely. I think succession planning is probably the key, you know, and I think for all of us as humans, it's mostly, you know, because it's those younger generations that we know as we're aging ourselves now too, you know, and how we, you know, we're passing that knowledge over, but also how we're actually celebrating their new knowledge and, you know, their creative minds, because it's their world into the future. And I think it's that trust value that we need to instill on young people as well with their innovative ideas. And I think that's where I find it's quite saddening for the young people, because if they want to come home, then I think we need to be open for them to come home and their new way of thinking, especially when it comes to land management practices. And I, you know, and because you know, I'm witness to that. So in the way we're doing things with Yapchadak and what we're doing out here at Gracevale.
Thanks, Suzanne. Alicia, is there anything you want to add? Did I capture the conversation?
No, I think for me, what it was really about was that understanding of how we can actually try different methods to collaborate. So where we're talking about, and I've worked in natural resource management for nearly 30 years, and how we effectively collaborate and capture both the knowledge and do that early engagement. I've had some great insights, which obviously will pass back through to Jackie and Matt in regards to doing that better into the future, thinking outside the box. And what I've just witnessed was, you know, the ability to reach out across regions to people like Suzanne and say, you know, where can we do this better? How can you help us to ensure that we're really getting that good engagement on the ground in our region? Thanks, Suzanne.
Fantastic. It sounds like you guys had a really rich conversation, and I've really enjoyed listening to the responses, and it's really hopeful as well. So thank you so much for sharing not only the ideas but also the energy that surrounds it with lots of hope. So thank you very much. So then, if you've got extra comments as well from Tonya's group, please share those on the chat. We don't want to miss a single idea, and we welcome everyone's ideas, absolutely. So next on the share back is Kimberly. So over to you.
Well, it was very much a DAF fest in our conversation. It was Lou, Michael and myself, and we tried to get Michael to speak again. Poor Michael, but he politely declined, so it's up to me. So like Tonya's discussion, we very much focused on next generation too as being the opportunity for us, the opportunity for the government's investment. So we talked through the fact that from our perspective in a DAF government world, that we see so much happening in this space and really good work. So we talked through some specific projects that we've stumbled across or seen great work being done, and talked through the catchment bodies and the work that they've been doing in the areas of R&D, extension, all the things. We did identify probably a bit of a gap around the economics, doing the economics of these things, and something that potentially as government we should be supporting. And the opportunities for cross-collaboration being in communicating these things. So we're aware of some of the great work, but it doesn't necessarily translate across industries and regions, that maybe there's a communication piece in some of this stuff, as well as where the investment should be moving forward. And we very much felt like it was in the next generation, like Tonya's group, in that was the opportunity for the next step of creating that cultural change, that shift in thinking, because we acknowledge that there's been so much great work and so much collaborative successes that we could note in this space. It was like, how could we, as a central region or a district, value add, and us as the Queensland government. So fellas, if you want to jump in, by all means. Oh, tools. Lou talked a bit about tools too, and the importance of having access to great decision-making tools in this space. And the fact that some industries are further ahead than other industries. So there's potentially a role for those that are sitting across that, to piggyback on some of those success stories as well.
Do you have examples of what those lighthouse industries are?
Well, I do, but I'm not necessarily sure it's a great forum to share that, just to acknowledge the fact that we think every industry that's progressing this work, is noteworthy. So I'm not too keen to cherry pick some, but yeah, we did in our discussion raise some examples of some good work. So Michael talked about some stuff that he's come across. In my industry development days too, I've stumbled across some great work, but it doesn't necessarily translate out. So it'd be good if, as a cross-region group, that sort of information is shared. Yeah.
Great.
I was just thinking if there's anything I missed.
That's pretty it. Like, Kim, this is like another one of those. Oh, you go. Yep.
I was going to say, I missed incentives. We wanted to make sure too that because there has been consistent investment, not just from government, just across the board, from regions and from industry groups, etc., that we just wanted to make sure that the gains that have been made would continue to be made. So we talked about incentives and stuff like that, and whether grants are appropriate, not appropriate, that sort of thing.
When you look at the investments made by state government through Agri-Science Queensland, through NRM bodies, federal government programs, Soils Australia, Soils Health Australia, whoever it is, what has been the uptake and practice change, and is that acceptable in terms of a cost benefit, in terms of a return on investment? It's one of those wicked problems that we talk about frequently in the department and in various forums, but it's like a behavioural change thing. Jackie, this is your strength. This is about behaviour change, cultural change, a growth mindset, all those things that you talk about at an individual personal level. could talk about it more, but it often comes after a disruptive event or something quite impactful or tragic, and there's usually a drought involved or a loss of whatever, and you get like a precipitated change on farm. And I've met with heaps of people. So they went from pretty traditional farming practices to full-on regenerative, organic, whatever the outcome they were, looking for is quite starkly different to what they were before. Yeah, Jackie, you're an expert, so I'll leave it to you. But how do the funding models and the funding systems assist that to happen? And how do we attract new entrants who might be more amenable or more receptive or actually go at change actively?
It's interesting. I'd love to have a deeper conversation on this, but I think it's the triggers that create the change is the really interesting part. And is it possible to find positive triggers rather than it's often negative triggers, which you've just alluded to too. So thank you, guys. All right. Well, if you've got any more comments from Kimberly's group, please share those on the chat and articulate as much as you can on the chat, just so that we're capturing everything in your voice. That would be fantastic. So David was the spokesperson for the next group. So over to you, David.
Thanks, Jackie. Yes, we had Shireen, Deb, Peter and myself in our group, which gave us a bit of an east-west cross-section, which was good. I think we certainly saw that a shared challenge is climate change and drought, impacting everything from the ability to preserve the reef, for instance, through to livelihoods in grazing lands of Western Queensland. An opportunity for collaboration in that space is coming about through the Future Drought Fund, and particularly the Australian government's call for innovation hubs for drought innovation hubs in that space. And we were aware of Central Queensland University having a bid that crosses right out into Western Queensland, and that they're looking to link in with rapid NRM groups, etc. So there could actually be quite a useful collaborative platform emerging if CQU are successful in that bid. One of the points of difference in terms of challenges was actually water. So whilst there are some areas in the coast that have good, like plentiful supplies of water for irrigation, for instance, whether that be for cane or back into cattle operations, it's not necessarily affordable. And making that water work for you as well as possible to run a viable enterprise is a challenge. And that's distinctly different to west of the range, where there isn't enough rainfall for dry land cropping, for instance, and most of the grazing enterprises and even farm homesteads, for that matter, rely on bore water from the Great Artesian Basin, supplemented by surface water. And west of the range, there are some perceived risks around mining and the potential impacts on water quality within the Great Artesian Basin. And I guess some of the challenges, particularly for landholders in the coastal strip, relate to the way that the threats to the reef are being addressed. So the restrictions that are being placed upon farming, both cane and cattle, for instance, to address those risks. Extreme weather events as well as drought was highlighted for climate change, and that within cropping, more innovation to preserve soil moisture and to use water efficiently were highlighted. And we also had quite a bit of discussion around the opportunities for carbon farming. most of the projects for carbon are actually in Western Queensland and Western New South Wales at the moment, and tied up within the Mulga lands, and there's nearly $1 billion worth of projects all up. And I think one of the things we discussed was that there are real opportunities for soil carbon projects to get up and running if only the costs of assessment and detecting the soil carbon changes were lower to landholders. So we had discussions around the possibility of collaborative approaches, cooperatives, etc., to share the cost of monitoring the soil carbon change. And those were the key things that we picked up on, I think. I hope everyone has heard what I've said, because whilst I can see myself properly on screen, nearly everyone else is frozen.
Oh, we've heard you, and you've done an excellent job, David, with some, clearly your group had some excellent ideas and you've articulated them really well, particularly the last points around carbon farming and the cost. If only we could get the cost of assessment lower. It sounds like a really interesting research project, as an example. So to build upon that, so others in David's team, we have got time if you would like to share any additional builds from what David has already spoken about, that would be great. All right, he's done a good job. Nothing else. Awesome.
One thing that I raised, unfortunately, as the countdown was hitting for our group, was so we didn't get to actually explore it, but is what opportunities might arise from the proposed solar farm industrial hub at Barcaldine. And certainly one of the products they're looking to produce is biochar and carbon neutral nitrogen fertilizers and supplements. And they are certainly, I know they are keen to look towards the coast and cane farming, cropping, dryland cropping, etc., in terms of being able to sell their biochar. And also, I guess they have the hope that the biochar could actually help reduce the runoff of sediment and nitrogen into the reef. So there could be an emerging opportunity there over the coming years as well.
Fantastic, and it sounds like an interdependent collaboration too, which are always the strongest. If you look at collaboration theory, if you can get that interdependence happening, they have a greater chance of lasting. So that sounds just like it's got all the right hallmarks of being. So if you've got some thoughts on that, please pop them in the chat. And David, if you don't mind, it would be great if you could also explain that in more detail in the chat too, because it just means in terms of us gathering everything, we've got it from, we've got the right words to articulate it correctly. So any more thoughts from David before we head to Matt McIntyre? Looks like you've got the floor, Matt.
Right, so I don't have to move that, do I? So you can hear me? Sorry, I just got to swap laptops again. Yes, we didn't follow the rules. There's three of us, including Ananya and Catherine, who couldn't join us but entered some things in chat, so it's quite tricky. We did get on board eventually. We jumped around a bit, but key challenges: death by 1,000 cuts. Water and soil amongst the regions is divided into regions. Two smaller compartments really. Some stuff that's been repeated by others, so I'll just go through some of the gaps. We don't, there was a feeling we don't learn lessons from others, including other regions. We're not the only dry part of Australia. There's others doing things, there's others doing work with the irrigation land as well. And also there's other countries that are drier than us. We're dry, but there's others drier. Let's be aware of what's going on overseas. There are some good...
Sorry,
Yep.
was that just trying to capture that? Was that we don't pick up the lessons from others?
Lessons from other areas, yeah. It's not just we're building a potential use of a network across Central Queensland, but we can't dismiss there's other good ideas and people getting together elsewhere that we should learn from. Some thought, well, amongst the three of us, there's good individual perspectives of what should happen, and we heard that through Will Wilson with the leaky dam and the Pete Andrews approach type stuff. Previously, the opportunities, I'll get onto those. It's really looking at the whole of landscape approaches. I think that's come up a bit, but we drilled down a bit of what that actually means. We need better information and characterised information that suits, within reeds and within catchments, etc. We need better interaction with those type of works. We just heard from Michael sum up before about, there's a lot of good information from various levels of government. But I think we've got to realise too, part of that, the new change needed is some of that information's got to come from the landowners and people out there. That they're the ones that can characterise their future needs for data better. So we need to sort of break down, and that ties in. We did jump around to governance. There's a lot of governance matters tied to that as well. Knowledge of soil and water management is there, but we just need to, so it reinforces the last point, reinforce that everyone has got a perspective that we should take note of. Yes, big driver is the disaster risk and climate related risk globally and what we're experiencing now. Incentives, big driver in that, there's a thought that we don't have the incentives right. Whether it's regulatory, self-regulation, or even government policy, we're a bit of a mixed bag. A lot of politicising issues at times. And that's come up too when we went on to, the cost of players trying to get into new innovative ways of doing things, carbon farming, regen farming, etc. So there's just a bit of a mixed bag from fed, state and below with direction, knowledge and sharing and all that type of stuff. So they were the drivers. I think I've got all the drivers there. And costs of red tape, issues with carbon farming, issues with examples of people, landowners doing good little projects on water management, but having been told by local government that need to go off and do various studies at high cost. So, some of that becomes, again, disincentives. Ways to improve governance is better collaboration across regions, is building up momentum for argument across a broader area is a good way of changing government decisions. And I'm calling it governance rather than government because some of that might involve ourselves. And to build the momentum for change, in those various aspects is the benefit of having that better and broader network. And I think if I've missed some points, I'm sure Bob will pick me up on them. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. One of the other ones that I put forward is that we tend to look at regions in isolation. We don't look at the whole system. So if we look at an area and say, oh, hang on, we need to look at this area here and the river systems that are flowing here just within our region, we don't consider the upstream regions as well and what the impacts come down from there. So we need to take in the whole, say, water system and look at that, and the whole land area and look at that. We tend to put things into isolation because we find that's easy to do and we can deal with that. And there is impacts that will flow from one area onto another area, which we don't consider. And we've had the good example of the whole Murray-Darling Basin system and how complicated that is. And they still haven't been able to work out the volume of water, correct volume of water that's in that system. There's still great flaws in that. And there's various water soakage areas that go into groundwater that feed into that. They're still learning about all of this. And we need to take note of all of the different areas, right from what the traditional owners had in those lands and that, and incorporate that right through into this whole systems thinking and put it all together into a proper package rather than just compartmentalizing it and just working on that small area.
Thank you, Matt, and also thank you, Bob. Some big thinking across that, and you're really touching on that it is a systems thinking. And have we got more feedback from your group? Good. Great. Well, that now concludes the end of this workshop, which is about sustainable land management and water. And some fantastic ideas have been unpacked and shared, and they've been shared on the chat as well as through this discussion, as well as on the whiteboard. So we've got a lot of a treasure trove of information there. So just like last time, I will conclude with a quick poll, which has been pre-populated with ideas from before. So there's been so many extra ideas. So the last point in the poll will be, I'm just getting this one ready. The last point will be, just like the others, any other ideas, and just write those into the chat. So the poll has just gone up, and you can tick more than one. So which of the collaboration opportunities across Central Queensland for sustainable land management and water security appeal the most? I've only just outlined a few, and there's clearly many more that have been discussed today. So add that into the other ideas and just write what they are in the chat so we can start building upon those. And you can pick more than one. And if there's one of the points that you would like to elaborate on as well as to what you mean by that, again, write into the chat why you picked out one and why it's so appealing, and importantly, why is it so important that we need to collaborate on this opportunity across the regions. So last chance to get your vote in. I'm going to end the polling now, and I'll share those results. So just out of the few that we have shared, the landowners integrated water management as a pilot, having the landowners involved, was something that has come out as the highest out of that one. But we also had the natural capital valuation system. So I think that was talking to the idea that David was referring to actually as well, of having ways of measuring the quality of the soil, and the carbon in the soil would be one way of measuring our natural capital. And the other one was gathering interregional evidence for sustainable land management farming. So I guess that's really helping people overcome the fears and and having more science behind it to ensure that we're moving towards what's not just right for environment, but is also going to be really good for business as well, for yield and ensuring there's the economic sustainability as well as the environmental sustainability. And please add anything else in the other ideas into the chat, because that's really key to capture that. So I'm going to conclude this part and share the screen so that you can see that the final theme for today, everybody, is our next and final theme to discuss, which is going to be enhancing supply and value chains. So another one of the big themes that had a tremendous amount of energy, and we'll be looking at where are the choke points across the supply chain and how can we increase the value adding out in the regions, and how can we just in general be shifting towards more valuable and secure supply chains of the future. So that's going to be the topic for our discussion next, and I'll see you back here in 15 minutes, and just enough time to grab a cuppa, and see you soon. Thanks everyone.